95% of men will read this list and feel nothing. Not because they lack discipline, because they've never been taught to recognize it in themselves. Discipline doesn't look like waking up at 5 a.m. to a cold shower and a green smoothie. That's the Instagram version. Real discipline is quieter, uglier, and far more common than you think, hiding inside habits you've dismissed as just normal. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly where you stand. And one of these 7 signs is going to catch you off guard, because it's the opposite of what every self-help account has told you discipline looks like. But wait. Before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff. Comment, "I subscribe," below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. If you've ever wondered whether you're actually building something or just spinning your wheels, sign number 4 is going to answer that question whether you like it or not. There's a man named Marcus. Every morning he wakes up at 5:30, no alarm needed anymore, laces up his shoes, and runs 4 miles before the sun is fully up. He doesn't post it. He doesn't tell his friends. He just does it, day after day, because at some point the decision stopped being a decision. Marcus isn't real. He's a composite of hundreds of men who quietly built the kind of discipline the rest of the world assumes requires a personality transplant. But here's what's strange. If you asked Marcus whether he was disciplined, he'd probably say no. He'd say he's just consistent. He'd downplay it. That's the first problem with discipline today. We've been sold an image of it that's so extreme, so performative, that most genuinely disciplined men don't even recognize themselves in the definition. We picture Navy SEALs, ice baths, 4 a.m. alarms, and inspirational quotes over sunrise photos. Meanwhile, the accountant who has paid off his debt in silence for 3 years, the father who hasn't raised his voice at his kids in 6 months even when he wanted to, the guy who says no to a 4th drink at every single work event. These men fly under the radar of what we call discipline, even though psychologically, they are demonstrating something far more powerful. Self-regulation under low-reward conditions. Psychologist Roy Baumeister spent decades researching what he called ego depletion, the idea that willpower is a finite resource that drains throughout the day. Later research complicated this picture, showing that self-control operates less like a muscle that fatigues and more like a skill that becomes automated with practice. That distinction matters enormously. It means discipline isn't about having more willpower than other men. It's about needing less of it, because the behavior has become identity. Today we're breaking down 7 signs that you already have that identity forming, even if nobody, including you, has noticed yet. Here's a test almost nobody passes. What do you do when there is 0 chance of being seen, praised, or held accountable? Most men perform effort. They train hard when their friends are at the gym. They eat clean when their girlfriend is watching. They work fast when the boss walks by. This isn't a character flaw, it's basic evolutionary wiring. Humans are status-tracking animals, and for most of history, reputation was survival. Being seen as competent and reliable by the tribe kept you fed and protected. So our brains developed a shortcut: perform effort when observed, conserve energy when alone. But discipline, in its purest form, is the behavior that survives the removal of an audience. If you still do the extra set when your training partner cancels. If you still cook the healthy meal when you're eating alone in your apartment and nobody will ever know if you ordered takeout instead. If you still show up to the unpaid side project at 11 p.m. because you said you would, that is not normal behavior. That's the top percentile. The philosopher Immanuel Kant had a concept useful here, even outside its original context. He distinguished between acting in accordance with duty and acting from duty. One man does the right thing because it looks good. Another does it because it's simply who he is now, regardless of outcome. The second man doesn't need surveillance. He's already the audience that matters. For the next 7 days, do one small invisible discipline task daily. Something with 0 possible audience. Make your bed with no one home. Skip the drink at a party no one will. Remember, track it privately. This rewires your brain to associate discipline with self-approval, instead of external validation, which is a far more sustainable fuel source. Most men are excellent at keeping promises to other people. Show up to a friend's move? There. Meet a work deadline? Done. But ask the same man if he did the thing he told himself he'd do on January 1st, and the story changes. This asymmetry has a name in behavioral psychology: the self-trust gap. Every time you tell yourself you'll do something and don't, your brain logs it, not consciously, but at a deep, associative level. It's the same mechanism that makes you distrust a friend who cancels plans repeatedly. Except now the unreliable friend is you, and you can't fire yourself. Research on self-efficacy by psychologist Albert Bandura showed that our belief in our own competence is built primarily through what he called mastery experiences, direct evidence that we can do the hard thing. Every broken promise to yourself erodes that evidence. Every kept one compounds it. This is why the man who keeps small, almost meaningless promises to himself, "I said I'd read 10 pages, I read 10 pages," builds an almost invisible form of psychological armor. He isn't more talented. He simply trusts himself more, and self-trust is the foundation underneath every other trait we call discipline. If you've been the kind of man who keeps his word to himself even in matters nobody would ever notice, you're not being obsessive. You're building the only currency that can't be given to you by someone else. This one sounds small. It isn't. We are living through what researchers now describe as an attention crisis. The average adult checks their phone over 100 times a day, and much of that isn't necessity, it's discomfort avoidance. The moment boredom, awkwardness, or a difficult emotion arises, the phone becomes an escape hatch. Here's why this matters more than people realize. Discipline is fundamentally the ability to tolerate discomfort in service of a longer-term outcome. If you cannot sit in a waiting room, an elevator, or a quiet dinner without instinctively reaching for a screen, you are training your brain daily to treat discomfort as something to be immediately neutralized. That training generalizes. It bleeds into your workouts, your work, your relationships, every domain where the ability to sit with discomfort determines whether you finish what you start. Neuroscientifically, this connects to the brain's dopamine reward system. Every phone check delivers a small, unpredictable hit of novelty, the same variable reward mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. Men who can resist this pull aren't necessarily more willpowered. In a mystical sense, they've simply not let their baseline tolerance for stillness erode. And that baseline tolerance is one of the most predictive traits of long-term success across nearly every field, because most valuable work, whether it's writing, building a business, or getting strong, is repetitive and unglamorous long before it's rewarding. Once a day, sit in a moment of natural boredom, a line, a waiting room, a red light, and leave the phone in your pocket. Let the discomfort exist without escaping it. This single habit rebuilds distress tolerance faster than almost anything else. Here's the sign that separates the men who are building something real from the men who are just consuming self-improvement content. Motivation is an emotion. Like all emotions, it's temporary, unreliable, and largely outside your direct control. The man who waits to feel like it before training, working, or improving himself has tied his entire future to the most unstable variable available to him. This is where the concept of identity-based habits, popularized by behavioral scientist James Clear but rooted in decades of psychological research on self-concept, becomes critical. There are two ways to build a habit. The first, I want to run, so I'll try to run today. The second, I am a Runner, so I run. The first requires a fresh supply of motivation every single day. The second requires none, because the behavior isn't a decision anymore, it's an expression of who you already believe you are. Most men are still operating on version 1, wondering why they can't stay consistent. But if you've noticed that you no longer debate with yourself about whether to go to the gym, you just go, the way you brush your teeth without negotiating with yourself first, that is not a small thing. That's the exact mechanism separating men who transform their lives from men who simply plan to. The uncomfortable truth is this: the man waiting for motivation to strike is, statistically, going to wait a very long time, because motivation is downstream of momentum, not the other way around. Action creates the feeling most men are waiting to feel before they'll act. In 1972, Stanford psychologist Walter Mischel ran what became known as the marshmallow experiment. Children were offered one marshmallow now, or two if they waited 15 minutes alone in a room with a treat in front of them. Follow-up studies years later found the children who waited tended to have better life outcomes across several measures, though later replications suggested family stability and environment played a larger role than the original study implied. Still, the core insight survives scrutiny. The ability to delay gratification, when present, is a powerful predictor of long-term success. But here's the harder version of that test, one adults face that children never do: delaying gratification when it costs you social standing in the moment, turning down the drink when everyone's watching, leaving the party at a reasonable hour while your friends call you boring, choosing the disciplined path when it makes you the outlier in the room instead of the one who fits in. This is genuinely harder than solitary willpower, because humans are wired to fear social exclusion at a survival level. Being the odd one out once meant being cast out of the tribe. If you can absorb mild social friction today in exchange for a result 5 years from now that none of the people judging you will ever see coming, you are operating on a timeline almost nobody around you is using. That gap in time horizon is, quietly, one of the biggest differentiators between men who build extraordinary lives and men who stay exactly where they are. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps of World War II, wrote about discovering something in the worst possible conditions. No one could control his internal response to what was happening to him. He called the space between stimulus and response the one freedom that could never be stripped away. Most men never test this freedom because most days don't provoke them enough to need it. But watch a man in traffic when someone cuts him off. Watch him when a coworker takes credit for his work. Watch him when he's disrespected in front of people whose opinion he cares about. This is where discipline either shows up or disappears completely, because emotional regulation under provocation is far harder than any physical discipline you could name. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote privately, not for an audience, in journals never meant to be published, reminding himself daily that other people's rudeness was their problem to answer for, not his to absorb. That distinction is doing enormous psychological work. The man who can feel anger rise and choose his next move anyway isn't suppressing the emotion. He's simply refusing to let a temporary neurochemical surge dictate a decision he'll have to live with long after the anger fades. If you've noticed yourself pausing before responding to disrespect instead of reacting instantly, even if it costs you the satisfaction of getting the last word, you're demonstrating a form of control most men, even ones who look physically disciplined, have never developed. The final sign is the rarest, and it's the one that actually predicts everything else on this list holding up over time. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on mindset drew a distinction between people who interpret failure as evidence of a fixed limitation, and people who interpret it as information about a system that needs adjusting. The first group tends to quit after setbacks because failure feels like a verdict on their identity. The second group treats failure as data and keeps moving, because their identity was never staked on the outcome in the first place, it was staked on the process. Here's what almost nobody talks about. The man who fails and needs someone to tell him it's okay to try again is still operating on borrowed permission. The man who fails, sits with the discomfort, and gets back up without waiting for anyone's encouragement, including his own inner cheerleader, has crossed into a category of self-sufficiency that very few men ever reach. He doesn't need a comeback speech. He doesn't need the montage. He just resumes, quietly, the way water finds its way back into a channel after being disrupted. If that's you, if you failed at something that mattered and kept moving without waiting for the world's permission slip, you are, statistically and psychologically, standing in territory occupied by a small fraction of men. Not because you're special. Because you've built a relationship with failure that most men spend their entire lives avoiding. None of these 7 signs require a gym membership, a morning routine, or a single motivational video. They require you to notice something you've probably been doing all along and dismissing as unremarkable, because you were taught that discipline has to look loud to count. It doesn't. It looks like the promise you kept when no one was checking. The boredom you sat through instead of escaping. The provocation you let pass through you instead of controlling you. If even 2 or 3 of these describe you, you are already further along than you've given yourself credit for. And if none of them do yet, you now know exactly where to start, because every one of these is trainable, starting today, with the very next decision you make. The men who build extraordinary lives were never a different species. They just stopped waiting for permission to become who they already had the evidence of being. If this gave you a way to see your own discipline more clearly, you know exactly what to do next. Subscribe, because the next video breaks down the single mental shift that turns discipline from something you force into something you simply are.